He never thought the day would come when his own home would feel like a battlefield. A place that once smelled of comfort, prayers, and family warmth slowly turned into a space filled with silence, suspicion, and hidden tension. What hurt him the most was not outsiders or enemies, it was the two women closest to his heart standing on opposite sides of his life. His mother and his wife. And somehow he found himself trapped right in the middle, unable to understand who was telling the truth anymore. Arman was an ordinary man with simple dreams. He had a stable job, a small but peaceful home, and a marriage he once believed was built on love and trust. His wife, Sarah, was kind-hearted, soft-spoken, and always tried to keep the house together no matter what. On the other hand, his mother, Nadia, was strong, traditional, and deeply attached to her son in a way that sometimes went beyond understanding. At first, Arman thought both of them would naturally adjust and respect each other. After all, he believed love could hold a family together. But he was about to learn how wrong that belief could be. It started with small things. Words that sounded harmless but carried hidden meaning. Complaints that seemed like concern but slowly turned into accusations. His mother would often tell him that Sarah was changing the atmosphere of the house, or not respecting traditions the way she should. At the same time, Sarah would quietly try to explain that she felt watched, judged, and constantly misunderstood. Arman would listen to both sides, trying to calm things down, convincing himself it was just an adjustment phase. But deep inside, something was slowly breaking. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between the two women only grew wider. Every meal at the table felt heavy. Every conversation had tension hiding behind polite words. And Arman, instead of bringing peace, started feeling like a judge in his own home, forced to choose sides even when he didn't want to. His mother's words grew sharper, her concerns more intense. She began saying things that made Arman question even the smallest actions of his wife. Why did she go out so often? Why did she talk less these days? Why did she seem different? At the same time, Sarah started changing too. She became quieter, more reserved, and often locked herself away in their room. Sometimes, Arman would find her sitting alone, eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. When he asked her what was wrong, she would simply say, "Nothing. I'm fine," but her voice said something else. Something deeper. Something broken. The real turning point came one evening when Arman returned home earlier than usual. The house was unusually silent. He could hear faint voices from the kitchen, his mother and Sarah talking. At first, it sounded like a normal conversation, but as he stepped closer, he realized it was far from normal. His mother's tone was firm, almost cold, while Sarah's voice was shaking. Words like loyalty, respect, and mistake floated through the air, but nothing was clear enough for him to fully understand. When Arman finally entered the kitchen, both women went silent instantly. The tension in the room was so thick it felt suffocating. His mother forced a calm expression, but her eyes were sharp. Sarah looked at him like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the strength. That moment stayed with him longer than he could explain. It felt like something had just happened, something important, something he was not being told. That night everything changed. His mother came to him privately and said something that shook him deeply. She told him that Sarah was not who she pretended to be, that there were things happening behind his back. She spoke with such confidence, such emotional weight, that for the first time, doubt entered Arman's heart. Not anger, but confusion. Real, painful confusion. Because this was his mother, the woman who raised him, who never lied to him before. But just when he started to believe he might be missing something, Sarah did something completely unexpected. She handed him a small envelope and said only one sentence. "If you want the truth, read this, but be ready for everything to change after that." Arman stood frozen, the envelope in his hand feeling heavier than anything he had ever held before. His mother watched from a distance, her expression unreadable now. Sarah turned away as if she no longer had the strength to stay in that moment. And in that silence, Arman realized something terrifying. Whatever was inside that envelope was going to destroy either his trust in his wife or his trust in his mother forever. He didn't open it right away. His hands trembled slightly as he sat alone in his room that night, staring at the envelope placed on the table in front of him. Outside, the house was quiet, but inside his mind, everything was screaming. Memories, doubts, conversations, and warnings all collided together. He kept asking himself one question: how did his perfect family turn into something he no longer recognized? And just as he finally reached out to open it, his phone rang. It was his mother. Her voice on the other side was low, urgent, and different from before. She said only one line before the call ended abruptly, a line that made Arman's blood run cold and left him staring at the envelope without moving. And that's where everything stopped. right at the edge of a truth that was never meant to be uncovered so easily. Arman stayed frozen for a long time after the call ended. The phone was still in his hand, but it felt like it had turned into a stone. His mother's voice kept repeating in his head, that last line echoing again and again, making it hard for him to even breathe properly. He slowly placed the phone down on the bed, eyes fixed on the envelope sitting on the table. It looked so simple from outside, just a plain paper cover, but in that moment, it felt like it was carrying the weight of his entire life. Outside his room, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful but suspicious. Arman kept thinking about everything that had happened over the past few months. The small arguments, the strange silence between Sarah and Nadia, the way both of them would stop talking whenever he entered the room. He had ignored so many signs, thinking things would settle on their own. But now nothing felt normal anymore. He stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The street outside was calm, life going on as usual, as if nothing inside his home was falling apart. That thought made something heavy settle in his chest. How could everything look so normal outside when his inside world felt like it was breaking into pieces? Arman turned back toward the envelope. His hand moved closer, then stopped. He pulled it back again. It was as if something inside him was fighting a silent war. One part of him wanted to open it immediately and end the confusion. The other part was terrified of what he might find. Because once the truth came out, there would be no going back. Meanwhile, in another part of the house, Sarah was sitting alone in the dim light of the bedroom. She had not come to speak to him after handing him the envelope. She had just walked away quietly, like someone who had already accepted something painful. Her eyes were fixed on the floor, but her thoughts were far away. She kept remembering everything that led them here. The misunderstandings, the accusations, the moments she tried to explain but was never fully heard. She had once believed that love could survive anything. But living under constant doubt had slowly changed her. Every word she spoke was questioned. Every action was observed. And the one person she wanted to trust completely, Arman, was slowly slipping away from her side without even realizing it. At the same time, Nadia was sitting in her own room, holding a prayer bead in her hand, moving it slowly without focus. Her face showed no emotion, but her eyes carried something deeper. Worry, fear, and something else she refused to name. She kept replaying her conversation with Arman earlier in her mind. She had said what she felt was necessary, what she believed was the truth. But now, after the phone call, even she seemed uncertain about how far things had gone. Back in Arman's room, the silence suddenly felt heavier than before. He finally sat down on the edge of the bed and picked up the envelope again. This time his grip was stronger. His breathing was uneven. He ran his fingers over the edges, noticing how carefully it had been sealed. Whoever prepared this wanted him to see it. Or maybe wanted him to hesitate this long before seeing it. He turned it over in his hands and noticed something he hadn't seen before. A small handwriting on the corner. Not a name, just a short phrase written in faint ink. It was almost faded, but enough to make his heart skip a beat. It didn't explain anything clearly, but it felt personal. Too personal. Arman's mind started racing again. Who wrote this? Why now? And why did both his mother and his wife seem so shaken around it? The questions kept multiplying, but none of them had answers. He leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. Memories started flooding in. His mother raising him alone after his father passed away. Her sacrifices. Her protective nature. And then Sarah entering his life, bringing laughter back into it, making him believe in companionship again. Two different women. Two different kinds of love. And now both pulling him in opposite directions. A sudden knock on the door broke his thoughts. He opened his eyes quickly, staring at it. The knock came again, softer this time. His heartbeat increased instantly. He didn't move. He waited. Then came Sarah's voice from outside, quiet and uncertain. She didn't ask to come in fully. She just said his name once. That was all. And somehow, that one word carried more weight than any argument they had ever had. Arman looked at the envelope again. Then at the door. His mind felt completely trapped between two sides. One holding his past. One holding his present. And both possibly hiding something he was not ready to face. Before he could decide anything, his phone lit up again on the bed. Another message from his mother. This time it was only a few words, but enough to make his hands go cold. He didn't open the message immediately. Instead, he just stared at it, feeling like every second was pushing him closer to something irreversible. The house outside remained silent, but inside that room, Arman felt like he was standing in the middle of a storm that was only getting stronger. And with Sarah standing just outside the door, and the envelope still unopened in his hand, Arman realized one thing clearly: whatever truth was waiting for him on the other side, it was no longer just about trust. It was about choosing a side that would change everything forever. Arman stayed still for a few seconds, staring at the phone screen as if it might explain everything without him even opening it. His mother's message was still unread, but its presence alone felt heavy. On the other side of the door, Sarah waited in silence, not knocking again, not calling his name again. That silence between them felt louder than any argument. He finally stood up and walked toward the door but stopped right before touching the handle. His hand hovered there for a moment. He could feel his own heartbeat in his fingertips. Every part of him felt divided. One side wanted to open the door and hear Sarah's voice. The other side wanted to open the envelope and finally understand what his mother was trying to tell him. Before he could decide, another memory hit him. A moment from a few weeks ago when his mother had asked him quietly, almost carefully, if he was really happy in his marriage. At that time he had laughed it off. He thought it was just concern. But now that question felt different. He began to wonder if there was something his mother had seen long before he did. Outside the door, Sarah finally spoke again. Her voice was softer this time, almost tired. She didn't ask him to choose anything. She simply said she needed to talk. That she couldn't keep everything inside anymore. There was something in her tone that made Arman pause. It wasn't anger. It wasn't defense. It sounded more like exhaustion. At the same time, his phone vibrated again. This time it wasn't a message. It was a call. His mother's name flashed on the screen. Arman looked at it for a long moment, then slowly rejected the call. For the first time he felt like he needed silence more than guidance. But rejecting the call didn't bring peace. It only added more pressure inside him. He opened the door. Sarah was standing there, hands slightly shaking, eyes showing a mix of fear and determination. She looked at him for a second like she was trying to read his face. Neither of them spoke immediately. The air between them felt fragile, like one wrong word could break everything completely. Before she could say anything, Arman raised the envelope slightly. Sarah's eyes dropped to it instantly. That small reaction told him more than words could. She knew exactly what it was. Or at least she knew enough to be afraid of it. Inside the house, the atmosphere shifted again. Sarah slowly stepped inside, but she didn't sit. She stood near the wall, keeping some distance. That distance wasn't physical only. It was emotional. Arman noticed it clearly now. They were no longer the same people who used to talk freely without thinking. He asked her directly what was inside the envelope. His voice was calm, but there was tension underneath it. Sarah hesitated. For the first time since all this started, she looked unsure of how to answer him. Before she could respond, footsteps were heard from the hallway. Nadia had come closer without making a sound. She didn't enter the room fully but stopped near the doorway. Her presence changed everything again. Now all three of them were in the same space, but none of them felt together. Sarah looked at Nadia, then back at Arman. It was clear there was a long history behind this silence. Something unspoken had been building between them for months. Maybe longer. Arman felt trapped in the middle again, but this time it was different. This time he didn't feel like a judge. He felt like someone who was missing pieces of his own life story. Nadia finally spoke. Her voice was controlled but firm. She told Arman that she only ever wanted to protect him. That everything she said came from concern, not control. But Sarah interrupted softly, saying that protection should not feel like isolation. Her words weren't loud, but they carried weight. The room fell silent again. Arman looked at both of them, trying to understand where the truth was hiding. Every sentence he heard made sense in its own way, yet they were completely opposite. That contradiction was breaking his trust slowly from both sides. He opened the envelope slightly but stopped before pulling anything out. His hands trembled again. He wasn't ready, but he also couldn't stop anymore. Sarah noticed his hesitation and stepped forward slightly, then stopped again. It felt like she wanted to stop him, but also knew she had no right to. Nadia's eyes stayed fixed on the envelope. There was something unreadable in her expression now. Not anger. Not fear. Something closer to regret. Arman finally pulled out the first paper. It wasn't long. Just a few lines. But as his eyes scanned the words, his expression changed instantly. Not into shock yet, but confusion deeper than before. Because instead of answering questions, it seemed to open new ones. He looked up at both of them, trying to find meaning in their faces. Sarah looked like she was holding back tears. Nadia looked like she was holding back something else entirely. And that was when Arman realized the most dangerous part of all this truth was not what was written on paper, but what was still being left unsaid by both of them. The room stayed frozen in that moment, with no one willing to speak next, and the truth still far from being fully revealed. Arman stood there holding the paper, his eyes still fixed on the words he had just read, but his mind refusing to fully accept them. It felt like his thoughts had slowed down, as if everything around him was moving in a strange, distant blur. The room, the silence, the faces of Sarah and Nadia, all of it felt unreal for a moment, like he was watching someone else's life fall apart instead of his own. He looked up slowly, trying to find something in their expressions that could help him understand what was true. But what he saw only made the confusion deeper. Sarah was no longer just nervous. She looked shaken, like she had been carrying something heavy for a long time and was now standing at the edge of breaking. Nadia, on the other hand, was still calm on the outside, but her hands betrayed her. They were tightly clasped, her fingers pressing into each other as if she was trying to hold herself together. Arman's voice came out low, almost broken, as he asked if what he just read was true. The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. For a moment, no one answered. Even the house outside seemed quieter, as if it too was listening. Sarah finally took a small step forward. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. She swallowed hard, then looked directly at Arman. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. She said that the paper did not show the full truth, only a piece of it. That there was more behind everything, things that were never meant to be understood halfway. Nadia immediately responded, her tone sharper now. She said that half-truths were still truth, and that Arman needed to stop being confused by emotions. Her words were controlled, but there was an edge to them that made the air in the room feel tighter. Arman took a step back without realizing it. It felt like the room was closing in on him. Every sentence he heard was pulling him in a different direction. One voice felt like protection. The other felt like pain. But both felt real. He looked down at the paper again, trying to make sense of it line by line. It mentioned events, conversations, and decisions he had never known about. But the way it was written, it didn't feel like a full explanation. It felt like part of a larger story that was still missing key pieces. And that missing part was what scared him the most. Sarah suddenly spoke again, this time faster, as if she could no longer hold it inside. She said that she never wanted things to reach this point. That she had tried to keep peace in the house, but silence had turned into misunderstanding. Her eyes moved briefly toward Nadia, then back to Arman, as if searching for support that no longer existed. Nadia interrupted again, saying that peace cannot survive without respect, and respect had been broken long before any of this started. Her voice was firm, but there was something underneath it that Arman couldn't ignore. It wasn't just anger. It was pain mixed with something older, something unresolved. Arman raised his hand slightly, asking both of them to stop. His voice was stronger now but still shaky. He said he could not take more half-statements, more indirect accusations, more hidden meanings. He needed the full truth. Not pieces. Not versions. The full truth. For a brief moment, both women went silent again. That silence felt heavier than anything before. Then something unexpected happened. Nadia slowly walked into the room. Not aggressively. Not loudly. Just slowly, as if every step carried something she had been holding for a long time. She stopped a few feet away from Arman and looked at him directly. Her expression had changed slightly. The calmness was still there, but now it felt tired. Almost like someone who had been fighting a battle alone for too long. She said his name softly, then paused. For the first time, her voice was not firm. It was uncertain. She told him that some truths are not meant to destroy families, but to protect them. But sometimes, protection itself becomes misunderstood. Sarah shook her head slightly, as if she disagreed but didn't want to interrupt again. Her eyes were filled with emotion she was struggling to control. Arman's phone suddenly rang again, cutting through the tension. All three of them froze. He looked at the screen. It was his mother again. This time he didn't reject the call immediately. He stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly he lifted his eyes toward Nadia, then Sarah, then back to the phone. The ringing continued, echoing through the room like a warning that something unavoidable was approaching. Finally he answered. But he didn't speak first. Neither did his mother. There was silence on the other end too, a strange silence that made Arman's grip on the phone tighten. He could hear breathing. Uneven. Controlled. Like someone waiting for the right moment. Then his mother spoke, but her voice was different this time. Not angry. Not firm. Something between fear and urgency. She said his name once and then stopped. In that same moment, Sarah took a small step back as if she already knew what was coming. Nadia's eyes shifted slightly, but her expression remained unreadable. Arman's heart started beating faster as he asked what was going on. His voice cracked slightly despite his effort to stay calm. But before his mother could answer fully, the call suddenly cut off. The phone screen went dark. And in that instant the entire room felt like it had stopped breathing. Arman slowly lowered the phone, his eyes widening slightly as he looked at both women standing in front of him. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. And for the first time, Arman felt something deeper than confusion. He felt like the next truth waiting to come out would not just change his understanding, but completely break the world he thought he knew. The silence after the call dropped felt different from all the silences before it. This one wasn't just heavy, it was unsettling. Arman stood there holding the phone, staring at the dark screen like it might suddenly come back to life and explain what just happened. But it didn't. The room remained frozen, as if even the air inside had stopped moving. Sarah was the first to break the stillness, but only slightly. She took a slow breath, then looked at Arman with eyes full of something he couldn't easily read. It wasn't relief. It wasn't fear alone either. It was something deeper, like acceptance mixed with dread. Nadia, on the other hand, had not moved at all. Her gaze was fixed on Arman, but her expression had turned distant, almost as if she was already somewhere else in her thoughts. Arman finally spoke, asking again what was happening. His voice was low, but it carried frustration now. Not the kind born from anger, but from exhaustion. He felt like he had been pulled into a story he never agreed to be part of, a story that kept changing its shape every time he thought he understood it. Before anyone could answer, a loud sound came from outside the house. It was not loud enough to be alarming, but it was unusual enough to break the tension instantly. A car door closing. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps approaching the house. All three of them turned toward the direction of the sound without speaking. Arman felt something tighten in his chest. The timing was too perfect, too unsettling. Sarah stepped slightly closer to the wall, while Nadia's eyes narrowed just a little. The knock came a few seconds later. It was not urgent, not aggressive, just steady, controlled. Arman hesitated before moving. Every instinct in him was warning him that whatever was behind that door would add another layer to the already collapsing situation. But at the same time he felt like avoiding it was no longer an option. He walked toward the door slowly. Each step felt heavier than the last. Behind him, Sarah and Nadia remained silent, watching. When he opened the door, he didn't expect what he saw. A man stood outside. He looked calm on the surface, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he had been carrying tension for a long time. He wasn't a stranger to Arman, but he also wasn't someone he expected to see at this moment. His presence alone shifted the entire atmosphere instantly. For a moment no one spoke. Then the man simply said Arman's name. That alone was enough to make the situation feel even more serious. Arman asked why he was there. His voice was careful now, controlled. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced briefly past Arman into the house. His eyes landed on Sarah, then briefly on Nadia. That short look carried more meaning than words. Sarah's expression changed immediately. It was subtle, but Arman noticed it. Her fingers tightened slightly as if she was bracing herself for something. Nadia, however, reacted differently. Her face went still. Not surprised. Not confused. Just still. The man finally spoke. He said he needed to talk to Arman privately. The words were simple, but the tone was serious enough to make it clear this wasn't a casual visit. Arman felt his stomach tighten. He asked what it was about, but the man shook his head slightly, refusing to answer in front of everyone. That refusal alone made the tension in the house rise even higher. Sarah suddenly spoke from behind Arman, her voice slightly louder than before. She asked why he was here now at this moment. There was something in her tone that suggested she already knew the answer, but didn't want it confirmed. The man looked at her for a brief second, then back at Arman, ignoring the question. That silence was louder than any explanation. Nadia finally stepped forward, breaking her silence. She asked the man to leave. Her voice was firm again, but there was a crack in it now. Something emotional was starting to surface, something she had been holding back for a long time. But the man didn't move. Instead, he said something that made Arman's entire world shift slightly again. He said, "You were never told everything about your family." The words hung in the air like a warning. Arman's grip on the door tightened. He looked back at Sarah, then at Nadia. Both of them reacted differently again. Sarah looked away as if she couldn't face the moment. Nadia's expression hardened, but her eyes revealed something deeper, something like fear mixed with resignation. Arman felt his mind spinning again. Family. Truth. Secrets. Lies. Every word he had heard in the past few days started connecting in ways he didn't want them to. He asked the man to explain properly, his voice now sharper. But before the man could answer, Nadia suddenly said his name firmly from inside the house, as if warning him not to continue. That reaction alone shocked Arman more than anything else. Because for the first time he saw his mother not as someone defending him, but someone trying to stop something from being revealed. Sarah noticed it too. Her eyes shifted quickly between Nadia and Arman, as if she was realizing something was slipping out of control. The man finally took a step closer to the door and said quietly that the truth was not just about misunderstandings between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. It was something that started long before Arman's marriage. Something connected to decisions made years ago. Arman felt his breathing change. This was no longer just a family conflict. This was something deeper. Something buried. Something intentional. Before he could ask anything else, the man added one more line, softer but heavier than everything before it. He said that the envelope Arman was holding was only one part of what he needed to see, and that there was another truth still waiting. A truth that neither Sarah nor Nadia wanted him to find. The words hit the room like a shockwave. Sarah stepped back fully now, unable to hide it anymore. Nadia's face tightened, as if she had reached a point she had been trying to avoid for a long time. Arman stood between them, completely caught in the middle again, but this time it felt different. This time it didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt like a long-hidden secret was finally beginning to surface, and whatever came next would not just change his trust, but redefine everything he believed about his own life. Arman stood at the door, feeling like the ground beneath him had already started to shift. The man outside wasn't leaving, and his words were still hanging in the air like a warning that something deeper was about to surface. Behind Arman, the house felt frozen. Sarah stood near the wall, silent but tense. Nadia stood a few steps behind, her face unreadable but clearly no longer in control of the situation. The man finally stepped inside without waiting for permission. That alone changed everything. It wasn't aggression but authority. Like someone who had already decided the truth was going to come out, whether they were ready or not. Arman closed the door slowly. His hand felt heavy as it left the handle. When he turned back, the man was already looking at him directly. The man said calmly that his name was not important, but his role was. He was connected to a legal matter involving Arman's family, something that had been in motion long before Arman even got married. Those words immediately made Arman's chest tighten again. Sarah lowered her eyes as if she already knew where this was going. Nadia, however, looked at the man with a controlled but sharp expression, like she had been expecting this moment for a long time but still didn't want it to arrive. The man asked Arman to sit. Arman didn't move at first, but something in his tone made it clear that standing wouldn't change anything. Slowly, Arman sat on the edge of the sofa, still holding the torn envelope in his hand. The man took a file out from his bag and placed it on the table. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he looked at all three of them as if measuring how much truth they could handle at once. Then he said the words that shifted everything. He said the conflict between Nadia and Sarah was never what it looked like. It was never about personality, habits, or misunderstandings. It was controlled, carefully influenced, and directed toward a purpose none of them had fully understood. Arman frowned, not fully processing it. He asked what he meant. The man finally opened the file. Inside were documents, legal papers, old letters, and something that looked like a will. He explained that Arman's father had left behind more than just memories. He had left behind a complicated inheritance situation tied to property and business assets. But there was a condition attached. A condition that required unity within the family structure to legally activate full ownership. Arman listened quietly, trying to connect the dots, but nothing felt clear yet. The man continued. He said there were people outside the immediate family who had been trying to break that unity for a long time. People who knew that if Arman's household fell apart, the inheritance would weaken and control over it would shift elsewhere. That was when Arman looked up slowly. Sarah's hands tightened slightly. Nadia finally broke her silence. She asked the man why he was saying this now. The man looked at her directly and said because the plan had already almost succeeded. Arman felt his heart drop slightly. The man pointed toward the envelope in Arman's hand. He said that what Arman had been reading was only a controlled piece of information. Carefully selected, carefully delivered to create doubt. Not clarity. Arman's voice came out low. He asked who created it then. For the first time the man hesitated slightly. Then he said it. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't Nadia. It was someone close enough to both of them to understand their weaknesses. Someone who had been slowly feeding information, shifting perception, and creating distance between the people who were supposed to stay united. Arman slowly turned his head toward Nadia. then toward Sarah. Neither of them spoke. But their silence was no longer defensive. It was something heavier. The man continued, saying that both women had actually been aware of something being wrong, but in different ways. Nadia had sensed manipulation targeting Arman through emotional pressure. Sarah had noticed inconsistencies in the way information kept reaching Arman at the worst possible moments. Arman blinked slowly, trying to understand. The man then revealed the second twist. The ongoing tension between mother and wife had not been entirely natural conflict. It had been amplified. Small misunderstandings had been pushed further. Words had been twisted. Situations had been arranged so that every action looked like betrayal from one side or the other. Arman stood up slightly, shaking his head. He said it didn't make sense. That families don't just fall apart like that. That's when Nadia finally stepped forward. Her voice was low but steady. She said she had stayed silent because she wanted to confirm the pattern before speaking. She admitted she had started noticing how conversations were being repeated back to Arman in distorted ways. How simple things were turning into serious accusations without reason. Sarah then spoke for the first time in a while. Her voice was softer now. She said she had never tried to come between Arman and his mother. In fact, she had tried several times to reduce misunderstandings, but each attempt seemed to make things worse instead of better. Arman looked between them, his mind struggling to catch up. The man then delivered the final piece. He said the real goal was never just the property or inheritance. It was control over Arman himself. If he was isolated emotionally, divided from trust, and uncertain about the people closest to him, he could be influenced into making decisions that would benefit the outsider behind all this. The room went silent again. This time the silence felt different. Not like confusion. Like realization slowly forming. Arman looked down at the envelope again, then slowly opened the remaining pages inside. His hands were steadier now, but his expression was changing with every line he read. And then he stopped. Because the final document didn't accuse Sarah. It didn't accuse Nadia. It named someone else entirely. Someone he had trusted indirectly for years. His voice came out barely above a whisper as he read the name aloud. And in that moment, everything he believed about conflict, loyalty, and betrayal shifted completely. Sarah looked away slowly. Nadia closed her eyes for a brief second. And the man simply said, "Now you understand why none of this was ever simple." Arman stood there in the center of the room, holding the truth that had finally been revealed, but realizing something even more unsettling. The real ending of this story was not about choosing between his mother and his wife. It was about realizing who had been silently pulling them apart from the very beginning. Arman stood there for a long time after reading the final name. The paper in his hand stopped feeling like just a document. It felt like something that had quietly rewritten everything he believed about his life. The room was silent again, but this silence was different now. It was no longer confusion. It was realization settling in slowly, painfully. Sarah was the first to break the stillness, but only slightly. She lowered herself onto the edge of the sofa, as if her strength had finally given up. Nadia remained standing, but her shoulders were no longer as firm as before. The man who had brought the file looked at Arman once more, then stepped back quietly, as if his part in the story was finally complete. Arman slowly sat down again. His mind was trying to process everything, but it felt overloaded. He looked at the name again. The person mentioned in the document was not someone distant. It was someone he had interacted with many times, someone who had always seemed supportive, calm, and present during family discussions. That realization made his chest tighten. He whispered a question, asking why anyone would do something like this. His voice was no longer angry. It was tired. The man replied calmly that control is often not loud or obvious. Sometimes it grows quietly through influence, trust, and timing. He said that when people are made to doubt each other long enough, they stop asking who is behind it and start blaming each other instead. That was the real damage. Sarah looked down at her hands. She said softly that she had started feeling it early, the way conversations kept turning against her even when she said nothing wrong. The way small things were becoming big misunderstandings without explanation. She admitted she didn't know who was responsible, but she could feel something wasn't natural. Nadia exhaled slowly and spoke next. Her voice was calmer now, almost regretful. She said she had only ever wanted to protect Arman. After losing his father, he was the only thing that mattered to her. But somewhere along the way, protection turned into control without her realizing it. She admitted that her fear of losing him emotionally may have made things worse between them. Arman listened without interrupting. For the first time in days, no one was arguing. No one was defending. It felt like everyone was finally speaking without filters. but the weight of betrayal still remained in the room. Arman asked quietly, what happens now? No one answered immediately. The man finally said that legally things would need to be reviewed carefully. The inheritance structure, the manipulation attempts, and the interference would all need to be addressed properly. But emotionally, that was not something anyone could fix overnight. After that, he left the house. The door closed behind him with a soft sound, but it felt like the end of a long, heavy chapter. For a few minutes, none of them spoke. Then Sarah finally stood up. She looked at Arman and said she never wanted to come between him and his mother. She said she had entered this marriage with love, not conflict. But constant doubt had slowly changed everything around her. Her voice cracked slightly as she said she just wanted to feel trusted again. Nadia looked at her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she said something that surprised even herself. She said she never truly hated Sarah. She only feared losing her place in Arman's life. That fear had made her react in ways she didn't fully understand at the time. Arman closed his eyes for a moment. Everything they were saying now made sense in pieces. But those pieces had come too late to prevent the damage. Still, something inside him had shifted. He stood up slowly and placed the papers on the table. He said that what had happened between them could not be erased, but it also didn't have to define everything going forward. He said the real problem was not just one person's manipulation, but the silence, misunderstanding, and fear that allowed it to grow. Sarah looked at him quietly. Nadia did too. Arman continued, saying he needed time. Not to choose between them, but to rebuild his understanding of both relationships without confusion or outside influence. He said trust had been broken in many directions, and rebuilding it would take patience from everyone. For the first time, neither Sarah nor Nadia resisted that truth. Days passed after that night, slowly and carefully. The house did not suddenly become perfect again. There were still quiet moments, still emotional distance, still memories that lingered. But something important had changed. The constant tension began to settle. Conversations became softer. Boundaries became clearer. And slowly, truth replaced suspicion. Sarah started focusing on her own space again, no longer trying to constantly defend herself. Nadia began stepping back emotionally, learning to observe more and assume less. Arman found himself in between them, but no longer as a judge. Instead, he became someone trying to rebuild balance without forcing control. The legal matters were handled separately, and the truth behind the external influence was officially acknowledged. The name that had shocked Arman was addressed through proper channels, bringing closure to that hidden layer of manipulation. It confirmed what they had feared, that their conflict had not been fully their own from the beginning. But even after that closure, the emotional healing took longer. One evening, Arman sat alone on the rooftop of his house. The same place where he used to think about simple dreams. Now those dreams felt different. More grounded. More realistic. He thought about everything that had happened. The misunderstandings, the emotional distance, the confusion between loyalty and fear, and how easily trust can break when communication fades. He realized that family relationships are not just about love or duty. They are about understanding, patience, and the ability to listen even when emotions are high. Behind him, footsteps approached slowly. It was Sarah. She didn't say anything immediately. She just stood beside him looking at the quiet sky. A few moments later, Nadia also joined them, maintaining a respectful distance but no longer separated by hostility. No one forced a conversation. No one reopened old wounds. They simply sat there, sharing silence that no longer felt heavy. Arman finally spoke, not to resolve everything but to acknowledge it. He said that what they went through changed them, but it also showed them the truth about how easily misunderstandings can grow when silence replaces honesty. Sarah nodded slightly. Nadia closed her eyes briefly, as if accepting something within herself. And in that quiet moment, there was no dramatic resolution, no perfect ending. Just three people learning how to exist in the same story again, without letting the past control every part of the present. The story that once began with suspicion and emotional conflict slowly ended with awareness, reflection, and fragile understanding. And while trust would take time to fully rebuild, one thing was finally clear. The truth that destroyed their silence also gave them a chance to rebuild it the right way.